Hello. I suppose I should start by saying my name's Chris, and thank you so much for coming to the session that I'm doing here. It's my first time presenting at the Polyglot gathering, and I'm really excited to speak here and be here as well. I'm currently in the Czech Republic, where the weather at the moment is kind of changing every few hours between spring, summer, and winter. Today it's a bit more like winter, so it's quite nice to be here for an online conference, but I also know it's quite dark, so I'm sorry about that. And the reason that I'm here in Prague is that I'm an English teacher. I've been an English teacher for about 10 years now. Here in the Czech Republic, but also in Asia. I lived in Japan and China for a while. And I've taught at various kind of language schools and universities. And I'm also very enthusiastic about language in general. At the moment, I'm learning German. It's probably the best language I speak, and also Czech, and also Japanese. So I'm very interested in languages, but I'd say probably I'm a language teacher first, and language learner second. And I'm always trying to think of ways to improve the teaching that I do, and to help students get better at English. And this is kind of the reason for the talk today, which is about idiomatic language, which is something I think is so important. And maybe I should start by saying idiomatic language here, I'm not just talking about idioms, but they are part of it, and they're really important, and they'll be a big part of this talk. But I think idiomatic language can cover, slang, metaphors, proverbs, even swear words, anything that I would say is not mainstream language that you might find in every course book. I'm kind of classifying here as idiomatic language just for ease. And while during the talk, it would be so nice if you could use the chat box. I'm going to show some examples of idioms from different languages, and if you have any in your language or a language you speak that are similar to the ones I mentioned, or you know any that are really good, it would be great if you could use the chat box maybe to share them. And we would have an even bigger kind of collection of these, because I think they're so nice to learn. So please, use the chat box if you can. It would be very nice. So I think we can get started with the talk then. And so I thought I'd begin by speaking about the inspiration for the talk and the reason why I decided to speak about this topic. And it's actually from a trip that I took last year with a friend, and we went to Munich. And while I was in Munich, we were on a train, and I started speaking to a German man who was on the train with his son, and the son was curious about us. He was a little baby. And the man started speaking to us. First, I tried speaking to him in German, and then we started kind of mixing between German and English. And he told me, because I'm from Scotland, about a trip that he'd taken the year before to the Isle of Skye. And if anybody's been to Scotland or to the Isle of Skye specifically, you probably know the weather can be quite extreme. And he was telling us a story about one day him and the friend that he was with went walking around the island, and a storm came and they got stuck in a cave. I don't think it was for very long, but he said that the man who ran the hotel that they were staying in came to look for them, and he found them. And the sentence from the story that really stuck with me was that, this German man that I was speaking to said, and the hotel man said a very nice sentence to me. He said, "It's a wee bit nippy." And when he said this, I was thinking kind of 4 thoughts maybe came into my head all at once. And it was that this kind of formed a really serious part of his story. He really wanted to tell me this expression. So it was important, and he'd remembered it. He'd kind of internalized it. And another thing that happened was that it made me and my friend smile when he said it. And I think it kind of created a stronger bond between us during the story. So just him kind of learning this expression, which is very idiomatic, and I think at least very Scottish, maybe very British, And he'd internalized it, remembered it, he'd brought it out again, and he knew that it would create like a nice feeling between us, which it did. So I thought this was a really nice like moment, and it made me think about the value of these kind of expressions and how they can help kind of bring people together and help us to express different things to each other and connect maybe in a different way. So actually, when I was teaching recently, I was doing a unit from a course book that I'll show you here, all about weather. So the topic, it was for quite a high level group of students. It's an upper intermediate B2 group of students, and we were looking at different words for weather. And if you look here, you can see the options that they're kind of given for cold, which kind of range from like cool to freezing, cold. These kind of standard words, let's say, that we would say. So even at upper intermediate level in this course book, the students are just learning quite standard words that we would use to say it's cold. And then when I was thinking, but how else would we say this? Because I probably wouldn't always say, oh, it's freezing. I thought of a kind of list of so many alternatives that I think I would use, or maybe not necessarily me, but at least people from the area where I'm from and the country that I'm from. And I realized how many of them there actually were that were more expressive, more interesting, more emotive maybe than just saying it's freezing. So things here like it's Baltic, it's brass monkeys, it's Arctic, the cold goes through you, frozen to the bone, better outside. Even kind of more like more colloquial expressions, like maybe you'll freeze your balls off. And also, of course, this one, it's a wee bit nippy. So all of these were expressions that I would expect to hear. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if somebody came inside from being out in the cold and said these, but there was no space in the course book for the students to learn these expressions. And I think there are reasons for that, but I think they're not good enough reasons to not teach or learn these kind of expressions. So I was thinking about why maybe we don't teach expressions like these, and that course books do tend to stick to quite standard vocabulary in books. And I think idioms and idiomatic expressions generally are seen as less important or maybe valuable than tradition vocabulary. I'm not saying that I agree with any of this. Actually, for a lot of it, I disagree, but I think these are arguments that we could make why they're not taught. So maybe we think, oh, it's really useful to learn freezing and cold, and we can express whatever we need with those words. So why go, potentially down a rabbit hole of all these other possible variants? But I think it's a shame. It could be controversial. For example, the last one that I put here, I thought, should I put it? It's a little rude. So maybe there is this thought in people's heads that it might be too much to teach these expressions, or you wouldn't want the students to say it. But if it's something that you would say or hear, I think, why should they not learn it? But I understand this argument that maybe people aren't always comfortable with some of the options available. It's not always standard across a language. I think that's really true. There are maybe some people here who are, native English speakers and think, I've never heard, this expression, and I would never use this. And I think that's completely fine as well. So there are some here that I wouldn't use myself, but I know that they exist, and I know that you could hear them, and I might still, in a conversation with a student, share them with them, even though I might say, it's not really something I say, but I know that you can say this. It's just giving them some options. But yeah, especially in a large language, I think there can be a lot of variance on some of the expressions. The next one I think is a big one, in that it's just not compulsory for understanding. So, I understand this. The basic words will get the message across, they'll get the meaning across. Maybe we think there's no need to go into more deep intricacies. But I do think it makes speech more interesting, more specific, maybe more precise, even with what you're trying to say. And just like in the case of the German man saying it's a bit nippy, I think they create bonds between people when we use them, because some of them are very funny and engaging. And the last one is one that I do agree with, actually, is that often learners may sound, we can say, strange or maybe awkward when using the expressions. And I think anybody who's been a language teacher will know, I've had students and they'll know an idiom, but they'll try to use it in a conversation and they'll say, well, it's not my cup of tea. And they've really exaggerated it in a way that makes it come across really awkward. And I don't think it's their fault, because it probably is awkward when you're using some of these. And I know when I've learned idioms in German, for example, I don't always know when it's appropriate to use it and when not. So I'll kind of hesitate a bit with using it and kind of maybe wait and see what the other person, how they'll respond. So I do agree with this, that it can come across as awkward, but I think this is more about making the learner comfortable with when and how to use it so that they can use it naturally, rather than thinking, oh, I know this idiom and I'm going to try and use it here and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, which I think they often do. There's nothing wrong with this. Like, this is how we learn. And especially in a classroom, I think it's a safe space to experiment. But I think there needs to be a point where students can just use them naturally without this hesitation of using them. So it can be awkward. But now let's look at some reasons why I think they're really important. And I think the number one reason that idioms and idiomatic language are so important to learn is that they're everywhere in pop culture. And I think in music, in books, in magazines, on TV and movies, you're going to see so many of them. So I just chose this one example of a Katy Perry song, and I did a lesson activity about this quite recently with quite a high-level class. But you can look at the song, and we have all the lyrics here, and I think a student can, or we can, listen to a song, even if we don't fully understand everything that's being said, and enjoy it. And I have lots of students who could probably sing along to this song, especially younger ones. They could sing along and really enjoy it, and they love the song. But the meaning, I think, has kind of gone over their head a bit. And it's because when I look at it kind of more closely, I would say, here you can see there are so many idiomatic expressions in this one part of one song that if they don't know the meaning of the expression, it could be really confusing for them, even just in the first two lines. So if you take "bite my tongue" literally in the song, I feel like you'd be confused when you listen to it. But as soon as you know the idiomatic expression of, keeping something quiet, it makes so much more sense. So you can enjoy, I think, the song so much more. You get this extra layer of understanding of it that I think really, really helps you feel engaged with the culture that you're learning a language in. There's a lot here. I don't think you need to know all of them to appreciate the song. I think you can enjoy the song without knowing them. But I do think that it creates a much stronger connection. And so this was an example from Katy Perry. I could have chosen any song and any book page also and found lots and lots of examples of these. I wanted to maybe connect it a little to my own experience as a language learner, and with music as well. And for example, there was one song by Max Giesinger that I remember listening to and really liking, and I tried transcribing the lyrics, and I tried translating the lyrics. This was kind of early when I was learning German. And when you actually look at this song, I'd say the first 4 lines or so of the song, the meaning is very literal and very clear. It's just a song about the town that the singer comes from, how many people live there, how many people live in the next town, how many people live in Berlin. Okay, it's very clear. It's maybe a little strange. You're wondering, where is this story going? But then when you go into the second half of the verse, I think there's 2 really strong idiomatic expressions here that when I first heard it, I definitely sort of stopped and thought, especially this last one, which I think it translates to something like being on a roller coaster during a long haul flight. And I remember listening to it the first time and just thinking, I don't know what I heard, and then translating it and still being like, I don't know what I heard there. Is that is that an expression in German? The same, in this one about, finding 6 numbers in the lottery. Once I've actually kind of analyzed it, let's say I can understand the meaning, that you are looking for something really special and really rare in the context of this song. But when you first hear it, I think it's not immediately clear to you what you're listening to or what the meaning is, and you have to really think about it. But as you get more and more used to idioms and colloquial expressions in languages, I think you become much quicker at catching the meaning to, like I said, not just songs, but anything. It can be movies or books or anything, but it just speeds up your understanding of it, even if the English student knew half of these expressions that I've put here, it would be so much faster for them to appreciate and understand the song. So I think it's everywhere in pop culture. This is, I think it's really important. Pop culture, for me at least, is a really good entry point to a language. I really like listening to songs and watching TV shows in other languages. I think it helps me a lot to feel confident in the language. But there is so much colloquialism and idiomatic language in them that I don't think it's so easy to just immediately immerse yourself in them without learning some of these at least. I also think it makes it very difficult for translation, because if you don't know, again, if you don't know the expression bite my tongue, I think it's going to be quite tough for you to understand how you should translate this into another language. So I think an awareness of idioms, especially as you get to a higher level, and I think especially for younger students that I have, for example, who do a lot of translation still for their parents on holidays, them knowing some of these will really, really help them when they're having to decide how they should say it in their own language. I think another, it's maybe not vital, but I think it's really interesting and engaging and fun and motivating to be able to make comparisons with idioms in your language and with other languages that you're learning, because some of them are the same, but a lot of them are different, and different in really interesting, kind of unexpected sometimes ways. So I've used some examples here just to show you, but I mean, there are so many that I could have chosen. But again, in the chat box, if you think of any as well that you could add to this list, it would be great to add them, and we can see how many more we can get. But for example, I was thinking, first of all, of the idiom "kill two birds with one stone," which in Japanese would have the exact same meaning. So you can just translate it into Japanese, and that's fine. Whereas in German, you don't kill two birds with one stone, but you kill two flies with one swatter. And even more interestingly, in Polish, you roast two meats on one fire. And I think this Polish idiom is one of the only ones that uses this construction with meat. I think most of the rest of the languages that I looked at, they used animals in some way for this idiom. So it's interesting that the Polish have gone so differently with it. Another one, like "it's raining cats and dogs." So here in the Czech Republic, and I think in a lot of other Slavic languages, they would say it's raining like from a watering can, which makes so much more sense to me. And this is like an example of one of these idioms where I think, oh yeah, that is clear, whereas "raining cats and dogs" isn't. In Romanian, it's "raining frogs," and in French, you can say it's raining like a peeing cow. Another one that I thought was really interesting, so it's all Greek to me. So I think it's interesting how the nationality in this, or the language group in this, can get manipulated based on where you're from. So in Czech, I have no idea, and I've asked so many Czech colleagues and friends where this idea comes from of a Spanish village, but yeah, they say it's like a Spanish village. I don't know if it's talking about the noise, but And in Polish, you can say it's like a Czech film, which I think kind of harks back to the similarities between Polish and Czech. And how it probably shows you something about how they view the other language as well. I'm sure it's in fun, but it's an interesting one as well. And in Bulgarian, so it's like you're talking in Patagonian. So it's just interesting how different languages will choose different. I know a lot of maybe Russian uses, it's all Chinese to me. And so they're all using different languages that they consider really, really difficult. Okay, so it's a piece of cake, I think, is another good one here. So I know in French they don't use this food analogy. So they would just say it's a kid's game. So I think it's like something very easy. In German, I could do it with my left hand. It's this idea that most people are right-handed. So it's so easy that you don't even need your dominant hand. And in Polish, they keep this food idiom, but they would say it's a roll with butter. I'm not sure why. And I think one of the most interesting differences is about colors. So I think, for example, I find it interesting that in English we would say green with envy, but in Hungarian they would say yellow with envy. In English we're red with anger, but in French you're green with anger. The next one, the Japanese one, I think is interesting. If you don't know it, it's talking about inexperience. And so in English, I think we would call someone green if they're very inexperienced and don't know a lot about something or very new to something. But in Japanese, they use this expression like it's blue, to have a blue butt. I think it connects with something to do with Mongolia. But yeah, it's interesting that where we use green, they use blue. And then even just in German, when in English we would say, he got in a fight and he has a black eye, that they would say he has a blue eye, which actually also to me makes more sense because I think your eye is blue, not necessarily black when you get in a fight. So it's interesting, again, I think how different languages use different colors to express their ideas. So these are just some examples. Like I said, there's so many, but just some examples of idioms that I've noticed. It's really interesting how they change from country to country. And I think it highlights that you can't just rely on translation. So just thinking, I could kill two birds with one stone, I'll just translate it, and it doesn't necessarily work. It might, but it also might not. So I think it's important to not rely on translation for idioms. And the other one is I think it can just be really fun to learn a different way to express something. And there are a lot of idioms that aren't necessarily, or idiomatic expressions that aren't necessarily translated into other languages as easily as these are. These are very easy to, see the connections. Some of them, I'm not sure what they would be. This is a German idiom that I really like, that everything has one end, only the sausage has two. Alles hat ein Ende, nur die Wurst hat zwei. And I think it's a really nice way of expressing this idea that nothing lasts forever, and really connects with, I guess, German culture and lifestyle. So I think it's a really nice idiom that I can't think of a similar expression necessarily in English apart from nothing lasts forever, but I think this is a much nicer way to say it. I really like this one in Polish, this kind of idea that it's not my problem, which sounds really straightforward in English, it's not my problem, but this not my circus, not my monkeys, to me is a really funny interesting way of expressing this idea. And then also, if anybody studies Japanese, I think these kotowaza, the proverbs, Japanese proverbs, there are some really lovely ones, and I really like this one, that even monkeys fall from trees, so nobody is perfect. And again, I can't think of anything this nice in English to express this idea that you can't be great at everything, and there can still be problems. So if we're going on the premise that learning idiomatic language is useful, which I definitely think it is, I wanted to go back to the question, that was the topic for this talk, which is about teaching and learning them. So first of all, I wanted to look at how we can teach them effectively. Like I said, I'm a language teacher and I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to teach in a more creative, engaging way for students. And I know a lot of people here also teach languages as well. And I think a key thing is to provide alternatives wherever possible. And I think I've put this in italics here to kind of highlight, I don't mean we should overwhelm students with options. But I think it's fair enough if you have a class and they're really comfortable using freezing and very cold in sentences, starting to feed in, you can say it like this, or you might hear someone say this, and starting to give them alternatives wherever you can to these more like standard language. Authentic materials, obviously. So like I said, it's just rife in music and movies and TV shows and books. So I think any authentic materials that you can bring into the class that you can use with students, I think will be really helpful for them. It'll be really engaging for them. They can see it being used in a real way. So for example, this Katy Perry song I have used with classes because I think it's a really good one for looking at idiomatic language. So I think taking it into the classroom can just be so helpful for them to see it in real life. The next one is role play. So I think, the more that you can create a real life situation for the students to use it, the better. So just thinking of any way that you can set up a conversation between you and a student or between students so that they're kind of naturally in a situation where they would use it is great, because it's kind of forcing them to use the language in an effective way, because we don't want to just say, oh, you can say it's Arctic or it's Baltic, you can say it if you want, but actually creating a situation where they could say it. And I think focusing on pronunciation, again, this kind of goes back to what I said about the students saying, it's not my cup of tea, and they say it in such a, I often think, and I do this as well, I know I do, they say it in a very kind of cutesy, childish way because they're practicing it. But I think just focusing on stress patterns, on intonation when you're using these expressions, just will make it sound more natural. So don't just tell them this is the word, but how you would normally say it. I think, for example, Arctic and Baltic, there's a lot of stress on these words. So I think showing that, demonstrating it, will help them kind of understand how to use it more. I think any way you can get the message across is great. So I use dictaglosses a lot. It's a kind of dictation where you kind of tell students a story and they try to reconstruct it from notes that they make. And I think it's a great way to slip in some idiomatic language. And often students will say, if I use some expression in a dictation activity, and they'll say, what does this mean? And it's a great chance for learning to happen and for you to actually teach them, what it is and why you used it in this context. But dialogues, picture stories, I think anything that will get the idea across to them of what the idiom means, because some of them are very obscure. Like I said before, like introduce a few at a time, but regularly. So I don't think you should give them 12 alternatives to a word, but maybe you can give them 2 or 3, and then the next time you can give them some more, and you're kind of building on it gradually once they're comfortable with them. So I think it should be regular, but not overwhelming. And try to include them in discussion. So I think in writing it can also be useful, but I really try, if I'm teaching students new idioms or expressions, I'll try as much as I can to build a discussion where they are, again, forced to use them. So it's a bit different from a role play where you're creating a scenario for them to use it, but just when you're having conversations, trying to get them to use them. Anything that you can do, I think, will be really, really helpful for making them more comfortable and confident with these. And so then the last thing I wanted to look at, so this is how we can teach them. And like I said, I know some people here are teachers, but everybody here is a learner, myself included, and I'm always asking myself this as well, is how I can learn idioms effectively, because I enjoy teaching them, but I also like learning them. I like learning these expressions that I can use. And what I said at the beginning, I think holds true now. So going in to a language with a clean slate. So don't assume that because you say kill two birds with one stone in English, you can just say it in German or French. I think taking this idea that this language is new and might have its own set of idioms is important, and you know, telling yourself, wow, I'm gonna have to learn all these as well, and if they're the same, great, so you've saved yourself some time, and if they're not, you're gonna learn something new and interesting from it. I really try to question my teachers as much as possible and seek out alternatives. So I have right now a Czech, Japanese, and German teacher that I see every week. And I really push them sometimes, because I know myself as a teacher that you get in this habit of just teaching students the standard vocabulary. And because we do it so often, in 10 years, I've taught weather vocabulary a lot. So in my head, I have all the standard words that we use. I don't always think to teach them, which is why I think it's so important to think about this when you're teaching. But I think it's also our responsibility to, you know, check, like, is this how you would really say this? And whenever I've asked teachers this, especially maybe not so much in German, but definitely in my Japanese and Czech classes, when I've said to the teacher, like, is this, like, if we've seen something in a textbook, and I say, you know, is this really how you would say this? And very often they'll say to me, maybe I would say like this. They'll give me a totally different way of expressing it. It's not always idiomatic, but it can be, and it's interesting to get this perspective from a teacher of what they would say and wouldn't say. I would say research and try to use them naturally. So I try to look at websites, look at YouTube channels. There are lots of videos and content out there, like articles on blog posts, like 35 excellent Japanese idioms that you can use, or 80. There was one article I saw, it was like 80 common Japanese proverbs, and I just had a look through them, and some of them you think, oh yeah, I could use this in a conversation, and some of them maybe you think, I don't see any way I could use it, and that's fine. But if you can find a way to try and use them during lessons and with a teacher, it's a great way to experiment and see, you know, what works and what doesn't. And I do it sometimes with my teachers, where I'll try something, and if it works, and they don't even notice sometimes, and that feels great. And if it doesn't work, okay, so I know for next time. Going back to authentic material, I think it's the most important thing for learning it, because it's contextual. So in lessons, often, you know, we can give the students the vocabulary, but it can be difficult to really clearly contextualize it. So I really try to use as much authentic material as I can when I'm learning. It can be difficult depending on the language, but I like this process of figuring out, oh, they seem to say this a lot rather than what I'm used to saying, and see what's actually authentic and what's not. Keep a record, because it's so easy to forget them, because you're not using them as regularly as other words. And I think have fun when using them. Like for me, this is a really fun aspect of language. I'm interested in vocabulary and grammar and pronunciation, of course. I really like these things as well. But I really enjoy learning these, because as I said at the start, I think they're so connected with culture that you really can learn something very different by learning these kind of idiomatic expressions. So yeah, I think it's really important to have fun. So I think that's the end of the talk for me. So thanks very much for listening to the presentation and for coming. I hope you've either learned some interesting new idiomatic expression you didn't know, or got some new ideas either for learning or teaching. I really hope so. If you do have any questions, my email address is here, chris.bainelt@gmail.com. And also I have a website, which is in theory coming soon, for any, especially English teachers that might be interested in some ideas. It should be up soon.